Welcome to RSE for Grown-Ups. Come along with us as we walk you through the Relationships and Sex Education curriculum, otherwise known as RSE. We will be breaking the current curriculum down into manageable key stage chunks and topics.
This podcast is for parents, caregivers, or anyone in a supportive role with a young person. We will help you feel equipped for the highs and lows of growing up. If you're already listening, then it shows you are committed to supporting the important young people in your life. I'm Kelsie.
And I'm Sophie, and we are outreach workers at Luton Sexual Health. This podcast was funded by Public Health in Luton.
Hello everybody and welcome back to RSE for Grown-Ups. This is episode 10, our final episode.
I can't believe we're on our final episode.
I know.
It doesn't seem like long ago since we just started and we've been through the entire curriculum already.
I know. We'll talk a little bit at the end about sort of, I guess, our journey making this podcast.
Yeah.
We've learned a lot of things on the way. You would have probably noticed that we've got a little bit better at it.
A little bit more confident.
Less robotic.
And we've hopefully made an effort to make sure that we talk over each other as least as possible as it goes through.
Yeah. And also, sorry about my voice today. I have not been very well, but maybe it sounds really husky and lovely. Who knows?
I think some people will love it. I like it.
So this episode is raising boys and young men. And I guess we wanted to start by saying, especially because last time we said we'd have a special guest. We don't have a special guest, and it is just Kelsie and I talking on this topic. So we thought we'd just explain a little bit about how that makes us feel, I guess, talking about raising boys and young men without any boys or young men present.
I think that is a very good thing for us to consider. And actually, it would be fair to say that we reached out to some other professionals, and we've got some really amazing professionals working in Luton.
Yeah.
Some men that work with boys through the Youth Partnership Service, through sports clubs, through youth offending and youth justice. And there really are some amazing guys out there. But unfortunately, with scheduling and everybody's commitment to their roles, and everyone's really busy, unfortunately. We just couldn't make it work.
Yeah.
And actually, it would be fair to say that left us in a position where we felt quite anxious potentially about having this conversation that we'd planned to have, but not having a male voice.
Yeah.
And not getting a guy involved in that conversation and kind of coming from the experience of a male perspective. And then we sat and we thought about it, and we looked at some figures, and basically we realised there's about 3 million single parent households in the UK, and 89% of those are headed by a woman. And around 65% of secondary school teachers in the UK are women as well. So as much as we acknowledge that potentially the idea of having this conversation without a guy made us feel a little bit uncomfortable, we need to acknowledge the fact that there are lots of independent women who are raising boys and young men in this country and in our schools, and who need to be equipped to have these conversations regardless. We can't necessarily say that it's just a man's place to be talking to boys and young men.
Yeah, exactly. And we, like Kelsie said, when we were just sort of doing our sort of planning and organising this episode, we were really like, oh gosh, how are we going to structure this? What are we going to say?
Yeah.
What's going to be useful? And actually reading those statistics kind of made our point, is that although this may feel like a really uncomfortable topic, maybe for some women to discuss, and potentially also quite triggering.
Yeah.
Kelsie and I go into schools and we do group sessions with boys, which we're going to talk a little bit about in a sec, but some of that can feel really heavy and tiring, especially if you come from a place of having lots of personal experience with men and attitudes that men may have, or stereotypes that exist. And that may feel really sometimes icky to be having conversations with, I don't know, your son or somebody, a boy that you teach, or maybe you're working with somebody who is a man, and their views and the way that they might speak to young boys is making you feel like, oh, this is all a bit too much. It's still really important that I think we're here having this conversation to sort of make you feel like you're not alone doing it, coach you through it, hopefully give you some useful advice and tips.
And actually help people feel like they're equipped.
Yeah.
And like we've discussed before, of course, we like to have different perspectives. And me personally, like obviously I am raising a very, very nearly now 13-year-old boy, like 2 weeks till he's 13. So appreciated that from our perspective, it comes from a unique situation of potentially, or not unique, but a smaller minority of people are being raised potentially by 2 women. So like we said before, there's like fierce feminist attitudes in our house, and that does trickle down into your children and into your families. Yeah. So my experience of raising my son might be different from somebody else's, but it's important that we just talk about it, and we feel like valid as women to be part of the conversation, because it affects us, it affects our daughters, it affects our sons, and it affects their well-being and their mental health, and it affects the men that we love and the people in our lives. Like, you've got an amazing fiance that you're getting married to soon. We don't have overarchingly negative opinions of men in general. We just need to navigate these conversations in a way that are for the best. And for the best for everybody, not just to maintain the status quo.
And like you said before we sort of started recording, it's about not projecting all of these maybe societal views we might have on men, or personal experiences that we've had as with men as women, onto boys and young, like these boys and young men. We're meant to be nurturing them and actually, like you said, giving them a chance, and having those conversations and finding out why they think the way they think, why they do the things they do. So yeah, hopefully this is going to be a really good episode. We thought we would start really with adolescence, because when we're recording this episode, adolescence has probably been out nearly a month.
Yeah, and it's been a massive part of, I guess, shining a light on something that was already quite evident to us as professionals working in schools and dealing with the RSE curriculum. And it's kind of brought some of the things that we've been talking about for a while to the absolute forefront of like a national conversation.
So for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, Adolescence is a TV show on Netflix. It's a 4-part drama that every episode is filmed in one shot. So you really feel like you're following a story. It's incredible. It's got Stephen Graham in it, and a cast of other amazing actors. And it does sort of explain a journey of a young boy who ends up, spoiler alerts coming, just in case you want to watch it, just pause for now. It follows a journey of a boy who ends up killing a classmate of his who's a girl, and how everybody sort of finds out and reacts to this news. And yeah, it's just really brilliant. There's a lot more than that, but I don't want to give too much away.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of people will have seen a lot about it, or will have watched it. I know I watched it as soon as it came out, and so did you. And I know like my son, who's almost 13, has watched it as well and had his own opinions on it. So it isn't something that people have not seen. It's been a real like a bit of a moment really to actually bring this conversation to the forefront. I think straight after we watched it, one of the most interesting conversations that we had was the way that potentially our friends who don't work in the education system, or aren't involved in, they don't have teenage children, they're not part of that world, and how they perceived it. Do you remember what you were saying?
So we, like Kelsie said, I binge watched it on a Friday evening. And some of my other friends watched it over that weekend, and so it was a main topic of conversation in the group chat. And one of the girls messaged and said that her take from the series was that it was about bullying and knife crime. And I found that really interesting, because that is not what I took away at all from adolescence. I didn't feel like it was a story about knife crime. I feel like potentially the weapon that was used was sort of irrelevant.
I think that the fact that the weapon that was used was a knife is indicative of
culture.
Culture. But I think that it isn't a series that explicitly portrays issues around knife crime.
And I also didn't think it was a story about bullying.
And that's something that we heard a lot potentially from other professionals, or friends or family members, whatever, like, oh, well, it's about a girl bullying a boy and then he killed her and things like that.
Yeah.
And it's really fair to say that we don't know what happened to that between that boy and that girl. And the series makes a really clear point of saying you might think, oh, this is bullying, or this is like one person being targeted or attacked, or one person being ridiculed, or another person retaliating. But actually, we only have a real surface level amount of information, and that's quite real, really, isn't it?
I feel like that was one of my key takeaways from the whole series, was actually as an audience, as a viewer, and probably for the professionals in the show and the parents in the show, everybody was still a little bit in the dark. Nobody could really understand a motive, reasons, piece it all together.
Yeah.
Because also what was really clever is that a lot of the information that the police were getting, or the parents were getting, teachers at the school were getting, was tiny pieces from what the young people would say to them or explain to them. Oh, that means this, or that emoji means this. And adults basically being like, what? There's a whole different language, world, understanding that I don't have. And I think everybody was still left sort of completely perplexed. It was like really devastating what had happened, and no one could make sense of it.
Absolutely. And I think, like you just mentioned there about the language, and a big thing that came out of the series was like young people using emojis in a way that the police and the professionals involved in the series didn't understand. And parents were like, oh, well, people need to tell us what all these things mean that our children are using. And it's like, it's not really that simple, because it isn't like a set language. There isn't like translations for things. And actually what your children are using could be subjective to like their friend group or their school or anything like that. It isn't like, we can't provide you with a list of translations.
It's not a nationwide language.
No, absolutely not. And some people were kind of coming to us, like teachers, like, well, we need to know what all these emojis mean. And we're like, it was a really good point to raise, that we should understand how our children are communicating online and what stuff means to them. But that doesn't mean that people like us have the answer to be like, here's a list of emojis. Like I saw one the other day that was like, you know, the 100 with the lines under it. That to me is like 100%. Like, I don't know, I'm definitely a millennial, and they mean what they mean to me. And it was saying that had something to do, that 100% emoji had something to do with like masculinity and how somebody presented themselves and how much of a man they were, kind of thing. And that's not something that I would know. But again, that isn't an example that was used in adolescence. And they are quite chop and changey, and people are asking questions about the whole like red pill and all of this sort of thing. And actually, I think the point of adolescence, and what we probably would like to reiterate, is that this isn't something necessarily that an external force can educate you on. It can't be like, here's a dictionary of what your kids are actually talking about. It's like, you need to ask them. You need to find out what things mean to them.
Yeah. And we also, I guess on that note, it is like, it's not, I feel like potentially what could happen from adolescence, and because I've seen an article about it. Sorry, I'm going to cough. We're just going to have to deal with that this episode.
It's going to be fine. We've tried for 10 episodes and today there's a cough.
And I've got my water as well on this episode, because otherwise I'm just going to cough the whole way through. So let me just have a sip of water. Lovely ASMR. That it's not about then parents or whoever, carers, looking through a child's phone and looking at all of their messages or what they're looking at on the internet.
And then making an assumption based off of what they think that means.
Yeah, exactly. It's more about having the conversations, because I saw an article about how young people and children weren't entitled to have privacy. After watching Adolescence, it's about, and that made me feel really like, well, I don't agree with that. I feel like that's not the way to go. No. It's more about giving young people and children space, which I think is about what our podcast is about.
Yeah.
Is having those conversations and making it really normal so that they can come and ask questions. And so that you can also sort of ask them what they're seeing on the internet, or what they think of that meme, or what they think of that view that person's had.
Yeah.
Because also with Adolescence, it didn't mention necessarily all of these names that we hear.
No.
who are part of the problem, and we're not going to mention them on today's episode
that's what we
either.
talked about this, didn't we? We were like, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter who the online influence is or what the online influence is. Realistically, the point is that you need to be part of your child's influence.
Exactly.
You need to be part of their sphere of influence. And if that means taking interest in, we've talked about this before, but if that means taking interest in what games they're playing or who they're talking to or what they enjoy about what they're doing online and creating a space for conversation around that, then that is really important and that is really helpful. And we talked about the plan, and I know a lot's been mentioned around like Keir Starmer suggesting adolescents be shown in schools and Netflix taking steps to make it available, which is cool of Netflix to do. It's
cool for the government to acknowledge
that this is a thing and that there's an issue. But actually, who was the program made for? Really, it is a program that was made for adults, for parents. It was supposed to be like, kids don't need educating on what they're looking at online. They already know what their frames of reference are and what people talk about. And we laugh, like you and I were just discussing this with my son because it's school holidays and he's sitting the other side of the studio today, hanging out. But we were just talking to him about some of those online influences and things. And he was saying that it kind of, there's so much that basically adults can be too slow to catch up. And then by the time, if you're trying to learn about what emojis mean, the kids' conversation has moved 10 steps on.
Yeah.
So
that's a good point, actually, because actually showing it in schools, it's not meant to be an educational resource, and showing it without any context and just thinking that might fix the problem or that might solve a lot of issues without really saying, without a lesson or a teacher being present or an external teacher like somebody like Kelsie or I who go in and actually do this work, could actually do more harm than good. So I understand the sort of the point, and I think it's a really good step forward, but it's not really enough to just say, this is great, this is going to be fab for showing, young people.
It's not a catch-all. And actually, it's really important that we don't want boys in school, we don't want young men who are growing up to feel like they are being vilified.
Yes.
Particularly, if they're young, they haven't been in a relationship, they haven't done anything, like they've not done anything bad. And actually, if it comes from a perspective of seeing like something like adolescence and we need to be careful that 13-year-old boys are not going out and stabbing girls, that doesn't come from just being like, that problem is not solved by saying sit and watch 4 hours of TV.
Yeah.
And I do think that if you've got high school age children and you're a parent and you want to watch that in your home and have a conversation about it and really get involved in that, then do it. I'm not really sure how I feel about it being shown necessarily without context in schools in a lesson. I think that we could use clips, scenes. How did this person feel in this situation? Why do you think this happened like this? How did this escalate? Or why did that person say something? We could have those conversations and use clips and scenes from a TV program, or at home, you might just pause it and be like, oh, can you explain that to me?
Yeah.
Or like, what does that mean to you?
Yeah.
Well, to me, this means whatever, like the emojis. To me, this means 100%. But what does that mean to you?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really quite an interesting way to have it as a topic of conversation. And it's hard because we know that not every single professional in schools might share our opinions. Sometimes we do get like misogynistic comments in schools. It would be fair to say that we've both been subject to teaching professionals making comments that have made us feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And in different contexts as well.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't mean that I would feel that just because a teacher is showing a young person adolescence, it would have the right sort of learning opportunities with every member of staff.
Agreed. I was going to say, actually, on that note, shall we think about and talk about some of our experiences of teaching young boys in school?
Yeah.
Some of the challenges that we've had, some of the breakthroughs or like successes we've had, and how we've explained things to them. And actually, I think it is worth sharing when you were just saying some of the experiences we've had with male teachers in lots of different contexts, sometimes it does come from a place of they don't mean to cause, it's not to cause harm.
No.
They don't realise that what they're saying is detrimental, and actually we're just going there like, no, stop saying it. Oh, cringing.
So cringe.
But I think about a time where we were in a college and we were doing condom demonstrations with all of the 17 and 18-year-old boys. And it was a very busy day and it was quite hectic.
It was quite full on. It was actually probably one of the most full on experiences I've had as a sex educator.
Yeah, agreed. And we were quite overstimulated and overwhelmed by the end of the day. And it was sort of rounding up where the boys were coming through to loads of different stands, and it was winding down. And a male teacher came over to the stand and was sort of like, oh, what's all this about? And we started to explain what we'd been doing. And he said something like, oh, have you got, what did he say?
He said, what size condoms have you got? And I was like, in fairness, I'm quite a bolshy person. I snapped back and it had been a long day. And this guy said, what size condoms have you got? And I went, oh, don't even tell me. I don't want to know. And like, he was like,
I was only going to ask for extra small. I was only going to ask if you had a small.
Yeah. And I was like, I don't know why you think it changes the context of the fact that it's inappropriate to talk about. Like, you can see that we've got different size condoms. They're laid out on the table.
Yeah. And
actually, you were trying to be quite ostentatious. You were trying to be a bit show-offy, really, in front of a load of 16, 17, 18-year-old boys. Mm-hmm. And you walked up to two women and you started talking about the size of your penis in a professional context. And from my perspective, it doesn't really matter whether you were saying it was really big or really small.
You were still talking
about the size of your penis, and I don't want to know. Yeah. I'm a professional.
Yeah, and it was because we'd already heard quite a lot of comments and language that we'd sort of had to be mediating and say, well, actually, and it was getting quite exhausting having to do that. Yeah. But, you know, as we said at the beginning, these are still young boys and young men, and we are trying to not project how we feel about some of the things that are saying onto them, but rather help them navigate, okay, well, actually, it's probably not appropriate that you say that in this context, or here's some language, or here's a way that you could have said that better. For then a male teacher, a position of authority and responsibility, a role model to some of these young men, somebody that they look up to, somebody who they are learning from, to say something like that, felt a bit soul-crushing, I think, for us.
Yeah, it did.
It felt a bit like, oh, we're never going to get anywhere. We're never going to be able to achieve what we want to achieve, because that's going to stop us. That's a barrier. And I remember we reported it to the head of safeguarding and someone who we liaise with, who's a woman.
She was mortified.
She was absolutely mortified, and she really wanted it, escalating. And we tried to explain to her, yes, we understand that you have to take that seriously, but that's something that Kelsie and I encounter
all the time.
Yeah. And I think that makes it really difficult. And I sort of thought about all of the teachers at school who probably do hear those things from colleagues that they're working with, and how that just adds an extra layer of difficulty onto these conversations that they're having with young boys. What are some of your experiences of working with boys as a group when we're going in and talking about not just condom use and contraception and sex, but some of the things we talk about around consent and relationships and
harmful sexual behaviour? Absolutely. So actually, I can give an example of a really lovely session that we did recently. So we have, we work really closely with Youth Partnership Service in Luton, and we went in to do a session specifically on harmful sexual behaviour with a group of boys. This was not a group of boys that were exhibiting any signs of harmful sexual behaviour. It was more around like knowledge and awareness and actually being an active bystander and things like that. Yeah. So it was coming from that sort of place. And then with the group of girls, we did a session around exploitation and grooming, similar to what we discussed in the last episode. This group was made up of young people from different year groups between year 8 and year 10. Now, I've not taught in a situation where I had boys mixed year groups from year 8 to year 10. And actually, it created a really nice atmosphere. It did. The older guys kind of took on this like level of like responsibility and like professionalism. I don't really know how else to put it. Yeah. But like
they were very sensible.
They were very sensible. They were very engaged. we had very good support from the male staff member.
We did, yeah.
Who we did invite to come today, who couldn't come. We had very good support from him, who was making sure those young people were really engaged in that conversation. But what we did with them is that we explained a concept to them called the rape culture pyramid. And this is something that I love a picture. I love a grooming cycle, a rape culture pyramid, like
the consent triangle.
Yeah, any sort of like visual representation. And actually go to our Padlet and we will share some of these resources. I'll put the rape culture pyramid
good idea
on there for people to kind of have a really good look at. And it isn't my idea. I didn't make this, and I actually don't know where it came from. So I can't reference whoever did create this idea. So go do your research. Okay, so rape culture pyramid talks about violence against women and girls and how that kind of happens in society and how that builds. And actually the bottom of the pyramid, you've got this big chunk at the bottom of the pyramid. And that includes things that are banter. We've got the things that people thought were really funny, like the teacher making the joke about the condom size.
Yep.
We've got banter, lad culture, boys will be boys, just the general rhetoric and the way that we talk about men and masculinity and the way that we expect people to like hold their feelings in or present in a certain way. Concepts like homophobia, transphobia, sexism, they really do build that bottom foundation of the rape culture pyramid. And in that can be just sort of misogynistic jokes, things that people might not necessarily think are hurting anybody.
Yeah.
But what that does is that for everybody that partakes in this bottom section, some people will feel justified to move up a little bit. Okay? So because this is okay, I'm going to move up to the next level. And when we get into the next level, it's things that, again, people might see as like a victimless crime. So they are not, they're not explicitly touching somebody, they're not explicitly hurting somebody, but it could be just a pat on the bum as someone's walking by, which happens.
Yeah, groping.
Making somebody feel uncomfortable, lingering, leering, getting really in somebody's space. And then also it's the jokes that get a bit worse. So it's like rape jokes. Like, oh, I wouldn't actually do it, but the joke is a bit funny.
Things like catcalling, whistling, those sorts of things, like commenting on somebody's appearance in a sexual way.
And actually commenting on like young girls' experience in a sexual way. And that builds up. Okay, so because some people feel justified to do this, some feel justified to do this. And then we're getting to the much smaller proportion of our triangle. We're on like our third section. And in our third section, we do have really things that are getting a bit more aggressive.
Yes, sexual assault,
upskirting. We might have things like non-consensual image sharing. So whether that's unsolicited dick pics or revenge porn, it doesn't matter what it is. It's those kind of things. And actually it's pressuring somebody into sex. Making somebody feel uncomfortable, making somebody feel maybe forced into a situation. And again, we're building on that. And essentially, as this goes up and all of these different things are potentially allowed to occur in society, it makes a smaller group feel more entitled to persist. And essentially the top point on our pyramid would be violence against women and girls, including femicide, domestic violence, rape, sexual abuse, the real sort of hardcore stuff. And actually when we lay it out and we explain it like this, it becomes easier to explain, because people think, how does me making a joke about you're a woman, why are you teaching me when you should be making me a sandwich, contribute to violence against women? Well, I can really understand.
It's too big of a jump.
It's too big of a jump. It's much too big of a jump for a young person to visualise that the jokes that they are telling in a group chat or among their peers can contribute to people feeling like entitled to assault somebody.
Yeah. And actually reflecting on that lesson, that's probably one of the first times we'd taken that approach, wasn't it? Because we do a lot of work around harmful sexual behaviours, and I think we've said in previous episodes, we are getting more requests to talk to boys about harmful sexual behaviour, consent, how to deal with rejection, how to not hurt, like genuinely how to not hurt women was a request.
Yes.
So we were like rethinking, I guess, and restructuring how we deliver this information. Sorry.
It's okay. But they did engage with it.
And they did engage with it, and they asked really brilliant questions. And sometimes we don't have as good a response from boys, and we have had times where it has just sort of exploded with anger and frustration, and they've felt villainized. And I guess as educators, we've had to reflect on, okay, so what can we do better so that it doesn't get to that point, because it can very easily.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I have been in situations where I've gone into a school and had a young person walk into a lesson being like, I'm not being taught this by you, and walk straight back out. And some of that comes down to how the school handle it. And we do because we don't have time to build long relationships with every single one of these young people. We're not their form tutor. We're not their parent. We're not a professional they spend a long time with. We can't really build that relationship. So our first sort of 5 or 10 minutes, how we approach this really matters. And one of the things that does cause friction, I know you're laughing because you know what I'm going to say.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things that causes debate that we don't engage in is when we talk about sex and the law.
Yep.
Boys find it really hard to engage in the topic of sex and the law because they don't understand, okay? So the definition of rape, it is one of the most contentious things that young people struggle with in a lesson. The definition of rape is sexual assault where a penis is inserted into somebody, or someone uses their penis to insert it into somebody's body. That's rape. Yeah, by definition. I didn't choose the definition of rape, neither did Sophie. We are discussing the law, so it isn't really up for debate, but young people will say, oh, what? So only a woman can be raped? That's not fair. Well, actually, no, not only a woman can be raped.
Yeah.
Lots of men experience that, and that's really terrible. So let's not pretend it only happens to women. We're not saying that at all. We're saying that the definition of the word rape is that.
And actually, it's such a hard one, isn't it? Because we do know that sexual assault happens to anybody.
Yeah.
The sad truth of the matter is that it does affect women and girls more.
Yeah.
And I try to explain to young boys that could be for a whole myriad of reasons. One of them being that some boys and men who that happens to either sometimes don't know that they've been sexually assaulted because they may not understand what the definition of sexual assault is, because maybe they haven't been taught it, because some people think, well, it doesn't happen to boys.
Yep.
And the other thing is they may find it really difficult to come forward and disclose that that's happened to them and seek support and help. They're much less likely to report it. So we try and have all of these very contentious conversations with them, but it already is quite fraught because they feel like that is a social injustice and it's unfair. And the reason why I say to them, but it's really important that you know the difference between them all, is to keep yourself safe, to keep other people safe, and because you're all making jokes about it all the time.
Yeah.
Like the fact that rape and the word rape has become sort of like desensitized, I'm like, it's really important that we understand that it is penetration without consent of a penis. And like you said, that isn't up for debate. Nobody's saying that it's your fault that is the reason why it's law. But I remember when I first started doing this work and I was being asked to do a lot of sessions with just purely boys around consent, and that was a big one. And we would go off topic hugely because they would be coming up with scenarios about, well, what happens if this happened? How long would they're very concentrated as well on how long somebody would get in prison or serve time for a rape.
Yeah.
And then we say to them, but that's not even, 1% of cases even go to court.
Yeah.
So we're really actually not talking about prison.
No.
And we're not talking about court cases.
And we're just talking about having healthy relationships and morality and not hurting somebody and
having sex consensually.
Yeah, and having like good fun sex for your life.
And how to look out for signs of consent and how to do that in a really fun, sexy way. And like we've mentioned before, you know, all of these conversations.
What's more sexy than knowing the other person is totally into it is like...
And this is what we do have to say to them. And although pleasure is not on the curriculum, that is something that Kelsie and I are very passionate about when we're talking to whoever we're talking to. because sometimes helping them to understand consent and the law, that brings out these conversations, which are really difficult to then bring back down and contain. Whereas if we go from a point of view of like, sex is really fun, pleasurable, flirty, let's think about how we can do all of those things and ask for consent and be safe in a really like pleasurable way, it goes a little bit better.
Yeah. I think it's important to acknowledge as well that there is a lot of shame attached to sex and sexuality when you're a teenage boy, really. There's quite a lot of that, and they sometimes perceive that the girls mature quicker than them, or that the girls are not interested in their peers, or and that's fair to say that boys and girls do develop differently through puberty and through high school, and they might not always be on the same page. That's fair, and there can be contention in the classroom. But actually, I do really worry about the shame they associate with their own sexuality, and we really need to combat that. So we delivered a session where we were trying to get young boys to know how to use a condom properly. And actually, one thing I would say is that they don't just assume your young people know how to use condoms, because they don't.
You know that session I talked about where we saw all those boys and we were doing condom demos and the teacher said that thing? We saw 250.
Yeah.
Not one of them did it correctly.
No, not first time, not anyone.
Not anyone.
So, and like we've done a condom demo on another episode and we've talked about condom use amongst young people, but actually I think that maybe shame does play into that as well.
Yeah,
like,
I agree.
Boys don't feel comfortable to talk about their body and their sexuality and their sexual identity with each other.
Their penis.
Yeah, oh my God, penises is like, and realistically there's worries about sexuality.
And what that might mean.
Young people are young men are very worried about being perceived as gay sometimes.
Yeah.
We get a lot of young people who are LGBT and who are out and comfortable and confident in themselves, and also need to learn about sex education and also need to have positive relationships with masculinity and all of those kind of things. But there's a real feeling that, like, for example, putting a condom on a demonstrator, I'm not engaging in that lesson because that's gay. It's like, oh, we're back here.
Yeah.
Like, wow, like the way that things have changed. Because like when I was at school, it'd be like, oh, that's gay. And then that kind of went away for a bit. And
it's back.
It's really back. And so we need to think about how we encourage our boys and young men to think about themselves as like sexual beings. And it's for pleasure and it's to have good relationships. And it's actually quite a positive thing. It's not like shameful or anything like that.
Yeah, really brilliant point. And I think it leads us on actually brilliantly to something we definitely wanted to discuss in the context of boys and young men, which was viewing pornography and the impact that has. Because on one hand, we definitely do see the sort of like, oh no, I'm not engaging with that. Oh no, I don't want to wear a condom. I don't need them. And I think that comes from a place of like maybe not feeling comfortable with their sexuality or their body, or even sometimes like touching their own body parts in that way.
Or is it like, oh, it's more masculine to
not use a condom?
Yeah. And especially when, like, if a young person is engaging in watching pornography, they're highly unlikely to see condoms used in the UK. You're supposed to use condom if you're creating commercial pornography, but in the US it's not a rule.
It's not standardized.
And then a lot of like, if a young person's using a platform like Pornhub or something like that, a lot of it will be US content.
Yes.
So they're less likely to see people using condoms. And even if there is a condom in a porn scene, you don't see the person putting it on. You don't see the conversation that they have negotiating condom use and talking about contraception and who's been screened and who hasn't. Like, all they're seeing is hardcore condomless sex without any context.
Yeah, and I think we think, and if we haven't, I'll get Kelsie to write it out and put it on the Padlet.
We think we already talked about this
because
before.
Kelsie has an incredible analogy about pornography and about how it's not something that you watch before having sex, and it's not something to teach you how to have sex.
No, that's it. We talk about how porn is entertainment.
Yeah.
And it's derived for adults, and when a young person's learning to drive, they don't think they can drive like the Fast and Furious. They don't think they're a rally car driver. But actually, we need to have a conversation with them that gives context to porn and say, just because you see that, it doesn't mean that your first time you're going to be doing it like a porn star, essentially. And actually, that might be an uncomfortable conversation to have.
Yeah.
And actually, I think it's probably easier for me to have that conversation with a young person in school than it would be to have it with
Your
my
son.
own child, who can probably hear us now anyway, so probably knows all of our opinions on this anyway. But yeah, I definitely find it easier. And actually, it's important to acknowledge that maybe you're not the right person to have every conversation. Pull from your village. Like, who are your resources? Who are the people that are available to you? Who are the important men in your children's life? Because just because it might not be like a dad, there are lots of other people. Is it an uncle or a granddad or a family friend or a football coach? It doesn't matter who it is. But just these conversations need to be happening, because we could sit here and say, make sure you've got the best internet security going. Well, we actually were talking about this before we started recording when William was in the room, and we were talking about internet security and having like content that's supposed to be viewed by over 18s blocked. And he was like, well, you could just get a VPN and go around the block. And I was like, yeah.
There's like I was saying, like adding, like not respecting your child's privacy and putting all these internet blockers on whatever you're doing, and it comes from a best place, and you know, wanting to have the best interests of your child and make sure they're safe. And we've mentioned it in other episodes. It puts a band-aid on the problem, but doesn't actually solve the issue. Because also the problem is that when they go to school, they're also surrounded by lots of young people who won't have those internet controls.
And also I think a lot of it just comes from WhatsApp videos and stuff like that. It doesn't even...
It's what we've spoken about, like a TikTok link could open up pornography on your 10-year-old's phone. And I get referrals, you know, because I work with children under the age of 12 who are in primary school. And a lot of the time on referrals, it says has been exposed to adult sexual media. And that doesn't necessarily mean they've looked for it, but they have seen it. They've been exposed. Yeah. Maybe that is by somebody unsafe in the home, or they've opened up a link, or they've got access to something they shouldn't on the internet. Yeah. And I have worked with children who are like 7 or 8 who have seen things that are made for adults, whether that's pornography or not.
Or like films of erotic scenes and things like that.
And they have been able to describe that to me very clearly, what they've seen, and they don't have any context or understanding of it, but it has definitely still had an impact on them in some way, and unfortunately sometimes then impacts their behaviour towards other young people. So it just like emphasises the importance of like having the conversation when it's happening, when it's occurring. Again, like you said, even if that doesn't feel like a confident conversation or comfortable one to have with your own child, to seek help and find somebody that can. Because I guess taking the phone away, stopping it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't really do anything.
It doesn't eradicate the problem. Yeah. And also I think that if young people are scared to because they think they've been doing something wrong. Yeah. So my parents said I wasn't allowed to go on the internet and view anything that wasn't designed for me. And now I've seen something that makes me feel really nervous. It gives me that sick feeling in my tummy. I don't understand it. I'm a bit shocked or grossed out. Like, I'm an adult and I've seen porn that's made me feel uncomfortable. Like, and that's quite reasonable. And you might be like, oh, why do I feel like that? Yeah. Okay. But actually, if you're a young person without context of the rest of the world, or a big knowledge of like kink or fantasy or consent, that kind of stuff, then it might be quite challenging for you. But because you feel like you've done something wrong, you feel like you can't talk to anyone about it.
Yeah, because also this is the other thing we do talk to young people about, of course, when we go in and speak about pornography or, you know, sexual stuff on the internet. You know, we talk about the law and we say it's illegal to watch pornography under the age of 18, as in you cannot buy it, you can't purchase it. But we also say, but if you have watched porn or you are watching porn, like this is how you can do it safely. The same as we would when we speak to young people about sending naked images. If you are doing that, you know it's against the law. We've given you that piece of information, but we know that doesn't stop people from doing things. Like it is really important. So like you said, they feel that they can come forward if they have seen something that makes them feel uncomfortable. Or, you know, we have met young people that have become addicted to watching pornography and who are masturbating multiple times a day, and then they're getting into relationships and they're not able to have an intimate sexual relationship the way they want to with their partner. And like that's
actually a real
problem. Yeah, it's a real problem.
And people coming through for like psychosexual referrals because they are having like quite normal vanilla sex with their partner and it's not doing it for
but
them.
They've been used to watching really hardcore.
They've been exposed to really hardcore pornography. And actually a big issue with young girls that I speak to that come to see me in the clinic or in one-to-ones is like, he thinks it's normal to try and choke me, or he thinks it's normal to slap me, or things that really, really, really are something that two people that if they trust each other and really enjoy and they're both on the same page might decide to engage in, but like isn't probably part of most 16-year-old.
No. Or a first sexual experience.
Yeah, it kind of takes the like the nice out of it a little bit.
Yeah.
I actually had a really funny conversation with my best friend about young people and access to pornography, and he is a little bit older than me, and he said when we were growing up we had like Nuts magazine and Zoo magazine, and he was like, so people thought it was bad because it was like women, he says boobies quite a lot, so it's like women with their boobies out, but that's all we had. Like we had that, and you're like swapped your Nuts and your Zoo and your FHM
and you
magazine.
maybe used your imagination
a bit more. And actually that was the point we were talking about. And he was laughing, talking about my son turning 13 and saying, shall I give him find him some old like Nuts magazines essentially to be like, look, you can read a bit of that, but that's it. Actually that's gone. That culture of like, and there's issues with lads mags, and there always was, and but what we do know is that people have been seeking out erotic art for
years.
For millennia, yes. If we look back to the Greeks or the Romans or whatever, they liked erotic art. And actually we like erotic art. That's what we do. And pornography is a form of that. And it's entertainment and art, but it's not for children.
Exactly.
And so we need to really think about it, have conversations with them about it, and help them kind of understand the context and things like that, because I think, especially in a world of like OnlyFans models, and they think, oh, all these women just grow up to be OnlyFans models and they're just going to make loads of money. And I don't know, it just feels like a lot of that discourse is happening anyway. So like, let's get involved in the conversation with the young people rather than just telling them off.
And like Key Stage 4 is the perfect time. If it's happening before and you think it's appropriate to have those conversations, you absolutely should. But they do have it on the curriculum in Key Stage 4 that the pornography, and they will be looking a lot at like what happens in pornography versus what happens in real life. And they'll also talk about like how people are treated when they make pornography, and they'll speak maybe a little bit about ethical pornography and about fair pay between actors and all those sorts of things.
And there's actually something, I don't know, somewhere in Europe, this week a law was passed so that there is a place in Europe, and I cannot remember where it is right now, where sex work is legal and regulated, that for the first time sex workers can claim like maternity pay and things like that. So it's like for these people it's their job and it's their career, and they are performers in an industry.
Yes, exactly, they're actors. For any teachers listening, Planet Porn is a resource on Bish, the website Bish, which is a really brilliant one, because it is literally just like things that we see in porn, like no pubic hair, really large penises, a
very
certain body shape,
vaginas.
Exactly, all of that stuff, and then what is actually real life, and getting young people to develop critical thinking, which I think is like such a big objective of RSE, so that they can just make informed choices and be like, oh yeah, I really enjoy watching porn, but when I'm having sex, that's completely different, and I don't need to do that, or I don't need to expect that from my partner, and be able to be like, oh, that porn could have been better if that person had like asked the girl, is this nice for you?
Yeah.
You know?
Like check in.
Yeah,
just
exactly.
I think this is really interesting. So we've talked a little bit about some of the lessons we have. We talked about the kind of rape culture and how that affects our boys and young men, and online pornography and how that affects them. And one thing that we know is really important is building resilience. Yeah. So how do we combat some of these issues? How do we support our young men and support our boys that are growing up and help to like build that resilience? So like we said, they don't feel vilified, they don't feel shame, they just feel like an active participant in this conversation.
Yeah, and to also maintain, I guess, like their emotional well-being throughout that. I think from my perspective, I come at it when I think about, because I don't have a son, but I work with young children, and a lot of the referrals I get from my under 12s program are young boys. I think I really come at it from a place of like, I talk a lot about emotion with my young people and how things make us feel. And I get them to really try and name them, draw them, describe how they feel, show me how they feel. You know, we've done sessions, haven't we, where we've got them up on their feet and like, you know, like got them to like show me rage or show me, and you know, all those sorts of things. Like be able to feel like they are able to express themselves, I feel like is a really important part of them developing like emotional resilience and being emotionally mature. And I also find that I really try and talk to young boys about healthy friendships and connecting with other young boys in a
like
really
who they surround themselves with
in a respectful way, and what does that look like. And you know, I think I've spoken about the friendship bridge before and thought, and you know, getting to think about good qualities in a person and already starting to think about being an active bystander and what that looks like. And feeling confident to say that amongst your group of friends. Like if somebody says something in your group of friends to someone that you feel like is not okay or derogatory or rude or mean, to be able to have the confidence and self-esteem to go, oh mate, I didn't really like it when you said that. Or,
and actually there's some really interesting ways that you can do that, and then we'll talk about that. Giving young people the tools to challenge things in a way that is non-confrontational, because quite often we know that young men feel uncomfortable with some of the things that their peers might say and that they don't want to like rock the boat or step out. But like there's little sentences like, can you explain to me why that's funny? Or I'm really surprised you feel comfortable sharing that. That just knock the wind out of someone's sails sometimes.
And then that's it. And that there doesn't really need to be any more said. But every time you're doing that, you're just like diluting the conversation and challenging it and not letting it escalate, I suppose.
I think that sometimes people view being an active bystander from quite a position of toxic masculinity. So they think that being an active bystander means like swooping in to save the day and protect the woman and save the damsel in distress and have a fight or a scuffle and like protect their honour. When being an active bystander is more like, I would be more impressed if you challenged your friend's misogynistic opinion.
Well, where did you hear that from? Like, have a conversation with them about it. Like, who did you hear that from? Oh, that person, that YouTuber, or that person who streams, or whatever it is. Like, just to, like, not just make it not normal. Just make it like.
Or like, I think, can you explain why that's funny?
I
really, not really. You can't, can you? Because it's not funny.
What other things do you think can help? Because we also are very aware when we're talking about boys and young men that sort of the mental health of boys and young men
is a huge issue.
And like, you know, things that kill boys and young men the most is suicide. How can we, I guess, with all of that we've spoken about, how can we link it and navigate it to also like maintaining good mental health, I suppose?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that some of the things I was thinking about is, like you said, they need to learn to feel their feelings. Don't just bottle everything up. And actually, as parents and caregivers and professionals, we can create a safe space for young people to feel their feelings. So in the home, we really don't want to be like, letting those sort of things of don't act like a girl, don't be a wimp.
Don't be a wimp, a wuss.
Yeah, don't be a wuss. Boys will be boys.
Stop crying.
Yeah, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Because actually emotion is a spectrum and we don't want them to just feel like lust or rage. Like there's gotta be more to it. Or like it isn't just as simple as happy and sad. There's so much more, and we want to give young men the language to describe their feelings. So point one, make sure you got the language to describe your feelings. Make sure that boys and young men have got positive role models in their life. Okay, we can't vet everybody. We don't know what everyone's going to say. And like, I hear my dad and my brother make comments that I'm like, I can't believe you're saying that. Like you, whatever. But I know that they are fantastic male role models in my son's life. And even if it's wind up, whatever. Make sure that you know your children have got decent role models in their life and that you're actively engaging in that. And that they feel like they're part of something. And I hark on about third spaces and young people's mental health and feeling like they belong. But actually, what does your child have other than their computer and their home and their bedroom and their school? Are they part of a football club or a music club or boxing? Like in Luton, there's so much like accessible boxing that goes on that helps really like build that resilience and all of those kind of things. Encourage them to feel part of something.
Yeah, I agree.
Explore them feelings.
I think because we both come from the era, and you were a youth worker for a long time as well. Like youth groups were a thing. Like you'd be like, where are you going after school? Youth club. It was just a space to hang out. It was just, like you said, a third space, a third home. You'd go and make yourself some toast and you play some pool or whatever that might look like. And we do have a space like that here in Luton.
Yes.
And I've heard some professionals say, I don't know about that for that young person. Because obviously I work with young people who also have additional needs, who sometimes, and we've spoken about this, may be perceived as more vulnerable if they're mixing with people outside of school or they're not in a space that is, safe to them yet. But I'm like, that could be a really great opportunity for them to meet more like-minded people and to just like be able to express themselves in a completely different way to school. We also know that not every young person feels great at school. Yeah. So like a third space mentally.
And I think it's really fair to acknowledge that a lot of boys struggle with the structure of their education system.
Yeah.
Sitting down for 6.5 hours a day in a classroom does not work for all boys.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for all in the park. It doesn't work for all young people. It doesn't work for all girls either.
No.
But they want to be moving their bodies.
Physical.
Yeah. And doing things. And actually exercise is important. Exercise is hugely important for mental health.
Yeah.
So exercise, emotion, role models.
We've got we think it's a good list. Like we said, we can't vet every role model.
No, we've tried.
But we've tried. We've created a list on our Padlet of some male role models, and we were talking just before this episode about Jordan Stevens, who, for those of you who are old like us, you'll have remembered from Rizzle Kicks.
But he's having like an absolute moment now.
Absolute moment. Like he talks a lot about his ADHD, addiction, and he talks a lot about masculinity. Yeah. And he talks a lot about like men not touching each other or being afraid to touch each other and like having these tactile friendships. And I think he's an incredible person for boys to look up to just hear a completely different perspective. Somebody like Ben Hurst as well. We showed some young people in that session some of his TED Talk, and they were like, I'm definitely going to go home and watch the rest of that because it's just a fresh perspective. It's not somebody saying you can't be this and you can't be masculine.
No.
And they're not, I don't think they even use the word toxic masculinity.
No, and I think we try and steer away from using the phrase toxic masculinity because we don't think that masculinity is inherently toxic. Yeah. And those two words have been really just sort of like
been mushed
jammed together. So it's like, we're talking about toxic masculinity, but do you know what masculinity means?
Yeah.
And actually, if people wanted to keep talking about women in terms of femininity, wouldn't enjoy that conversation. No. So we need to acknowledge that.
Yeah. So take a look because there are some really brilliant ones. And also just before we sort of start wrapping up, on the note of mental health, I read a book and I was recommended it by a teacher, and it's called Boys Do Cry. It's by Matt Pinkett. Again, I've linked that one because he was a teacher and now he goes into schools.
It's actually here.
Oh, it is there.
We've got it here.
If you're watching, it's there. It's that pink book, second to the bottom. He was a teacher for many years and now goes into school and talks about mental health to young boys. And his book's really brilliant for, I think, teachers and parents to give a read and get some useful tips because, again, it's just useful to have some conversation starters, some little ways in, some little keys in, particularly if your young person is not used to talking about these things.
Or you're not used to talking about these things. Or you're not used to talking
about these things,
Wow. I think that has been quite a lot. On the topic of raising boys and young men. And I hope that it has been useful to people. And I hope that you appreciate the fact that we would love to have had a guy helping us on this episode and sharing some of this perspective, but it just wasn't possible.
It wasn't possible.
So I hope that you've got something out of this, but it has actually been a real challenge for us to consider and make sure that we were doing this as well as possible.
Exactly. And also a challenge for me to get through it without coughing. I'm so sorry about that. Hopefully, I mean, it just adds a bit of realness to it. Bit of ASMR.
So that's it.
Yeah, that is it.
That is us having recorded 10 episodes.
Yeah.
And we have thoroughly enjoyed this. It has been a really amazing experience. It's been really incredible to have a platform to share some of our thoughts with this, and the podcast isn't even out yet at the time of us recording this last episode, but we have had some feedback from people who have listened to it, and it's been really amazing. So if you've listened and you've enjoyed what you've heard, or you haven't enjoyed it and you want to tell us what you thought, or maybe you just want to get involved in this conversation a little bit more, then please do reach out to us. We've got a feedback form on our Padlet, and actually, if you think that we should make some more and there's more topics that you would like us to talk about or hear our insight on, then please do let us know, because that would be really appreciated. But all I can really say is thank you so much for listening and for spending hours of your time wanting to find out more. And hopefully this really has helped some people support the young people, the important young people in their lives. Going very back to our intro.
Yeah, amazing. Remember, you can follow us on Instagram, TikTok. If you have any questions, submit them maybe via the feedback form and we can answer them on our Instagram stories or on our
social
TikTok.
media. Yeah,
we're very active on there, and we've got some really good content coming up, so make sure you stay tuned. And hopefully this isn't the last time you'll see us.
No.
But if it is, thank you so much for listening and watching.
Yeah, thank you very much and goodbye.
Bye.